Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward Looney here, and grateful that you are tuning in once again to this podcast. And the last time I had today's guest, Shaun McAfee, on, I think the podcast was still How They Love Mary, but we experienced the rebrand back in February with a new name, but the same style of interviews and such, kind of just realizing that the podcast wasn't always about Mary. But the last time Shaun McAfee was on, he talked about sacramentals. And of course, we did talk about Marian sacramentals like the scapular or the rosary or any other Marian devotion and such, indulgences, etc. But today he's joining us to talk about another book that he has that just came out with Sophia Institute Press, and kind of another resourceful book. So just as he had the compendium on the sacramentals from Tan, well, now he has All Things Catholic, a guide from A to Z. So kind of gives the perception that it's a dictionary. And so Shaun McAfee lives down in Louisiana. He is the founder of Epic Pew, a prolific writer. He does a lot of writing, and I've been a fan of his work for a long time. So grateful to have Shaun back for today's conversation. So thanks so much, Shaun, for joining me.
Thanks, Father. Thanks for that epic introduction.
That's great. That's how you plug it in, you know? So there you go. But let's talk a little bit. All Things Catholic, a guide from A to Z. I read some of the kind of what people were saying about the book, and one guy said, and maybe it was Carl Keating, I could be wrong, but basically said he thought it was going to kind of expand upon what John Hardin did, Father John Hardin or others. But he said that, no, that's not what it is, and that you have a fine presentation and it's captivating and such. So just tell us, what is All Things Catholic, this new book, all about? What can people expect when they pick it up?
I think it's a lot like a dictionary. There's definitely a dictionary presentation. It says a guide from A to Z, so we do go with every letter in the alphabet in order. But the topics I chose are, I think, what every Catholic definitely needs to know. So there's common topics like canon law and celibacy, but then there's modern topics that you might not find in any Catholic dictionaries, like development of doctrine, or end of life care, or the environment. And so this book, of course, we define and we talk about what the church teaches, and I present it in like a very concise amount of words, but there's also a lot of practical tips in it as well, Catholic pro tips. And so it's definitely an encyclopedia. It's built with hundreds of references to councils and encyclicals and canon law and so forth. But it's also got a lot of personal experience items that people will be able to either reinforce their understanding of these things or be able to carry them out, like evangelization or apologetics or what have you, just to make the completeness of this book not just be about sharing information, but be, sanctify and help people live a better Catholic life.
You mentioned development of doctrine or development of dogma. Did you have recourse to John Henry Newman, of course, with that topic?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, he was one of the chief saints that came through whenever I was converting to the Catholic Church. So Apologia Pro Vita Sua was important in my life. I think maybe I recommend his Development of Doctrine, Development of Dogma book. There's a lot of book recommendations at the end of all these sections.
Sure. And how many pages? So you reference it, encyclopedia, dictionary. So is this like hundreds of pages, or again, the thickness of it?
I think the entire book, with all the acknowledgments and everything, is less than 210 pages, which I would say is an enormous success, especially because this book it's full matte, full color pages with lots of art. So like I said in the beginning, these are not like really dense topics that you got to spend, days or weeks reading and studying. It's presented in an extremely concise fashion, but very, very helpful. We get straight to the nitty gritty.
As you put together this book, then going from A to Z, How did you go about selecting topics? Were they topics that were of interest to you, or did you have people suggest topics to you, or, how do you catalog something like this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I went through whenever I created the proposal to the publisher, I think I created kind of a pretty agreeable list of things that, like I said, every Catholic needs to know. But then I wanted to approach it, the actually my first idea for this book, Father, was to make a like an apologetics or an evangelization dictionary. And I let the publisher kind of help me form what the final idea was. But what we did was we took all those topics that definitely everybody needs to know, and then we just chose like modern, non-ephemeral, topics that won't expire, things that'll be important to Catholics in this generation for the next at least 30 or 40, 50 years. I mentioned euthanasia and immigration and things like that. So there's social topics, but then there's also, topics that have to do with theology that aren't going to expire, the four marks of the church, free will, Freemasonry. And it's like on that topic, like Freemasonry, where we get into like the things that you won't find in other resources. So we're not only just talking about Catholic topics, but we're talking about extra Catholic topics, or even like maybe pseudo-Christian or non-Christian topics like Islam and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism. And we talk about how the church views these groups or these ideas or these cults, and maybe how to engage with them as well, because this is definitely the kind of book where you want to kind of get a quick study before somebody else knocks at your door, preparing for that conversation for that person at work, get an idea of why they do the things that they do and how people in the past have successfully broached those topics as they evangelize.
So the way you present it is, here's letter A, here's everything, here's letter B, here's everything. So when you're talking about cults, like, you don't have them necessarily grouped together. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep, it's all A to Z alphabetical.
Yeah, it maybe, could be helpful in the back of the book. Yeah, maybe sort through some of those things, indexing like common themes and putting the layers together. I don't know, but just thinking as you mentioned those cult like or other faith traditions, etc. But so you mentioned Freemasonry wasn't on my list of things to talk about, but I've kind of been on a Freemasonry kick lately, just because of observations I've made and things like that. So I think it's always good just to kind of hammer out why a Catholic can't be a Freemason. So give me a little elevator pitch about that question.
Yeah, I'll try to be concise because it is kind of a thick topic, and I think the church needs to probably update its understanding just a little bit on Freemasonry, because what it was 150 years ago when Pope Leo the 13th was writing about it is, I'd say, a little bit differently than how those groups present themselves now. But essentially, these quote unquote secret societies, which anybody can join, they are made up of, first of all, people with probably heretical views. So these came from work parties, right? Labor parties, but they would have heretical views. They would have infiltrating um, interests of infiltrating different religious bodies in order to influence the leadership and the outcome of these groups. And then they would also have like quote unquote secret knowledge, which would have to do with their different rights and their different interests of that group, like we've already been saying. But the bottom line is that these groups, they don't jive with Catholic teaching. We don't keep things under secret. We don't allow only certain members to join any of our religious societies or our religious orders, and they, of course, have to be under the discipline of their local ordinary, which is their bishop. So these groups don't fall into really the broad practice of how we manage and socialize Catholicism within a culture or a country or a populace. So there's a lot of problems with them, and that's kind of, I suppose, the surface level that I'll try to keep it to. But those secret societies, especially those labor parties back, like I said, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they were a problem of some significant issue, especially within the United States, and the popes were adamant against people joining the wrong ones, and it took a few decades for them to sort out and actually talk about in a formal way what the problem was. So I think it's sorry to wrap it up, but I think it's a little bit less of an issue today because those groups, I mean, we kind of know about them, but I think the church would do well to kind of refresh its literature on those.
Sure. And Pope Francis, as late as last year, 2023, addressed Freemasonry in the Philippines. And
Right.
so it is something that has been talked about, but maybe, giving this definitive teaching or something like that, helping. Because I think some people say, well, I just don't understand why you can't be a Catholic and Freemason. It's just a social group, So I think there is that perception, but it's trying to get underneath like what it is they believe and the tenets of their belief and everything like that, and how it was in opposition to the Catholic Church, all these things. So yeah, I think you're probably right there. We need a better teaching, updated for the modern era for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of that's a thick topic, Freemasonry, for example. So obviously you're treating heavier topics. The book is only 200 some odd pages. So you must be doing a very concise entry for each topic.
Yeah, I really wanted to give somebody the essentials in a very approachable way. So this is a book that I think I wrote for obviously new Catholics, existing Catholics that want to brush up on certain topics, or maybe they've never really understood what Theotokos means or something like that. But also, I think that if I was a student, I say this all the time, is I try to write books that I would want to own myself. So this would be a book that even I, whenever I was a student, getting a master's in dogmatic theology, I would have really loved to have, just to kind of, do I really have like I call it a sanity check, especially in the professional world. Like, did I really get that right? And I can just go to one resource rather than, have to Google something and, check if it's on Catholic Answers or check if it's from EWTN. And this is one resource to rule them all. That's what I wanted to make.
Well, that's great. So, A to Z, I just want to throw in a few letters that I think maybe would have been hard to find something, but what about the letter Q?
Okay, let's go to Q. I'm in the table of contents here. I don't, LMNOPRS. We skipped Q. There's
Yeah,
probably something on New Advent on the Catholic Encyclopedia in Q, but I don't think it made its way. Quadresima, maybe
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, something like that. Even like the Questiones or whatever of Thomas
Right.
Aquinas or something like that's what I was thinking with Q. Okay, let's go to another letter. How about the letter X?
Okay. No X.
No X. So it's okay. Now
We
Z.
couldn't force topics into this book just to cover the letter.
Yeah, you couldn't put like Saint Zena or something like that. There is a Saint Zena.
There
Like
is
I
a
know
Saint
someone,
Xena. Yeah.
some no
And
Saint
she's not a
Zena.
warrior princess either.
No. Okay. Now this one I actually could think. So those were the two that I thought maybe could stump you. But Z, the letter Z, obviously I think Zucchetto. So like the bishop's
Ah,
hat. So I
I
don't know,
think we
maybe.
cover that under vestments,
Okay. So what
but
do you
in
have
Z
for
we have
Z?
zeal.
Zeal. Okay.
And I wrote that in there because I'm like, okay, I can't say A to Z without having not much. And this is one of my favorite parts of writing this book is I had to challenge myself to be like, okay, think of something other than what you would, ordinarily think of when you put zeal in. Okay, so there was a art to writing a lot of these, and I was thinking, okay, zeal, religious zeal, but actually we were able to and so I thought that the length of zeal would be pretty short and kind of stubby, and might just kind of been checking a block there, like I said. But zeal, we were able to get into, actual religious zeal, the zealots, that are in the
Mm,
Bible questioning Jesus and so forth. And then we're able to actually put a really nice Catholic tip in there, about having true zeal rather than being, a zealot, being, wild and overly ambitious about your convictions or something. So that was really fun. Yeah, but Z got one entry and it was zeal. But then a lot of these other ones, I mean, like whenever I was progressing through writing the book, Father, I mean, some of these I was, okay, I got through T, that took a week, or I got through, I don't know, G, and that took a 2 weeks or so. But some of these are pretty long. S, R. I'm looking through P. I thought that some of these would be longer than others, but P has like, 30 topics in it.
oh wow. What about
Yep.
the letter Y? That would be another difficult one.
We got Yahweh and yoga.
Oh, yoga. That's a, that's one of the controversial ones because obviously, like sometimes the Catholic Church, what we, kind of reflect upon and put out there, like we're challenging people in their daily lives. And so, there are so many people that do yoga, Catholics and other believers, whatever. And so, and there's always like the two extremes. Like you have one extreme of people that say, you can't do yoga, you're worshiping a false god, you're putting yourself in positions of worship of these false gods, etc. And then you have others who kind of take a very, it's okay, there's nothing wrong with it. You have churches that are hosting it in their basement or whatever, like I saw one influencer said that she went to a church and they were doing yoga in the sanctuary,
Oh dear.
like I just remember her post about that and she was just very, flabbergasted. So how do you approach that topic? Because and my understanding too is there's like some sort of I just hired an employee that made me aware of this, but there's like Piedra or something like that, which is like a Catholic form of yoga, but it's like a Christian or something. These are things I don't know about, but yeah, yoga. What's the Catholic Church's approach there?
So I got to give it up to my publisher. Publishers are kind of rough sometimes, and it's their book. Whenever you sign the contract, it's their book, and you kind of got to meet their audiences or even their internal, needs. Of course, it's going to be orthodox. It's some of these get an imprimatur or nihil obstat or something like that. But I was really grateful when it came to topics like this that the publisher, provided suggestions, but let me kind of write what I wanted to write. Still, though, even with that flexibility in this book, I really tried to stick to the discipline of just communicating what the church teaches. And if there was no specific teaching, which there's not a lot of like specific teaching and guidance on yoga, it mostly just comes from lay people, or good spiritual direction, and it just you can fall into one of those extremes, like you said, or get in the middle. But I really, if it wasn't one of those hard topics that the church teaches on, I tried to follow, a good path that wouldn't lead any reader into error. So with this one, what do I say? I think that I can sum it up here is that the church doesn't have a specific teaching, but doing things even in these forms with some of the words or the breathing techniques, they can seem productive, especially to our, bodily health. But, doing things like the namaste pose, like you might not mean whatever you're saying, but it's like kind of like whenever you were young and you sang the lyrics to, Metallica or something, you didn't really realize what you're saying until you were an older adult. And even if you say those things in an unknown language or with some sort of practice like yoga, even the namaste pose and those words, they have meaning. And you don't want, you would, I mean, if your body is the temple and you want to make this the best altar for God, you want to cover it with Christian things. You want to adore it that way. And so with respect to things like that, I kind of steer people away from yoga in this book. I don't outright condemn it, but I do provide some different alternatives. And I think you mentioned one of them. I can't remember how to pronounce it, but I'm trying to find it.
Piedra.
Piedra, yeah, and there's a couple others that are kind of growing in popularity too, that Catholics can, do. But basically, yoga is such an easy concept. It's, you're articulating your body. I'm a big fan of it too, or at least I was, about 10 years ago, because my joints started hurting from being in the military and whatnot. But it's an excellent way to, use your body's own resistance to, build flexibility, build stamina, build strength, and certainly those things. I mean, the saints will tell you that those things fall into the aesthetic lifestyle. So it can be a body's mortification to participate in those kinds of exercises, but just don't. Just do something else. Don't do the namaste pose. You don't have to do all the breathing techniques with the sayings and whatnot, or even in the groups. Just do the same moves. Just do it elsewhere in a different context, and I think you're pretty safe.
Now, as you sat down to write this book, A to Z, was there one of the entries that kind of you were most looking forward to writing that you're passionate about and that you're like, I can't wait to tell people about this topic of Catholicism?
Which one would that be? There were too many that were like that, where I was just like, okay, I know exactly how I want to approach that one because there's a way that I like to talk about it.
Sure.
Those are probably the ones that got the revisions. I think more importantly, it was like the really tough ones, like the dense topics. Maybe Freemasonry, I called it dense and thick, but another one that would be is like things like annulments. Like that is such an important process to communicate clearly, and that's very difficult. I mean, you could read through the entire section in canon law, and get, guidance from around the archdioceses. But, the fact is these tribunals, they're not exactly consistent. And the application of the canon law and annulments is really difficult to kind of, I don't know, summarize. So it's difficult to do without just quoting it. So I was looking forward, I think, as a writer, the challenge of a different type of writing style in order to kind of get away from what I want to say. And with a lot of these topics, just communicate in an effective way without, of course, plagiarizing and over summarizing what the church has to say on those. So yeah, I think that those were the ones I had the most fun with because I got the most growth out of them, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I'm willing to bet too, a lot of research goes into this. You're talking about annulment, so you're looking at the canon law. You're doing a lot of reading, a lot of resourcing, finding those resources and information that's available out there. So, as you looked into a topic, was there one that maybe you just were surprised by that you're like, I thought one thing, but now I've dug deeper and maybe I have a new understanding or a different approach to it?
Yeah, I wish I had that question earlier than this podcast because there were several of those where I submitted it to the publisher. I thought that I had a good understanding on things like even oh wait, there's a funny one, Father. I'll bookmark that. But there were there were some ones where I submitted to the publisher and it came back and I had just the opposite understanding. And those are moments of great humility when you're writing a book, especially when you're submitting it to an editor and you're supposed to kind of seem at least be an expert on some of these. But one of the funny ones that I submitted was, or actually I omitted, right? So we cover all of the sacraments, of course, in here, but I omitted confirmation. And it was just an egregious error, and we didn't even catch it until like honestly, like a couple months ago, like in January when we were doing final read throughs, everything was edited. We were happy. They were actually starting to fill in all of, the typesetting and the art. And they said, Shaun, you got to cut this one out and you got to write an exactly 540 word entry on confirmation. And that was just a funny one. It's just a big snafu that 160 plus topics. Sometimes you overlook the easy ones.
Yeah, most definitely. So, yeah, I think that's happened to me a few times, whether it's like talking about a Marian apparition or I'm talking about apparitions and maybe I forget Fatima or
Right.
Lourdes. It's like, I don't know how that happened. I talk about Fatima, I talk about Lourdes all the time. So yeah, easy to happen sometimes when you're so engrossed in a work.
Hmm.
So this book, All Things Catholic, a guide from A to Z. Do they buy it and then they read it A to Z, like they read it cover to cover? Do you think someone will do that? Or do you think it's more like A to Z on my shelf, pull it off when I have a curiosity? Do they spot read? Like, what do you think the average reader is going to do with this book?
I think this is one of those just in time slash just in case kind of books. You definitely don't want to go A to Z on this. You'd get bogged down on information overload. There's just too much information here to really actually retain. So I'd say whenever a reader picks up this book, probably scan through, of course, this enormous table of contents, 260 plus topics. Find something that sticks out to you. Or if you're looking for a specific topic, this book definitely has it. But absolutely for anybody out there, you want to, especially lay readers, you want to hit those topics that are going to come up in the just in case future. which is probably for sure future, right? Just in case, just in time. We'll add probably for sure, which is, the people at work, the people you meet at the gym, the people who see your large family at the grocery store and they make a joke or something about contraception, or the Jehovah's Witness that knocks on your door. You absolutely need to be prepared for those conversations. And it's best to, the book has excellent references to talk about what the church actually teaches on those, so you can get it right. But there's additional reading, and there's at least like 200 or plus tips on every one of these topics that talk about how to do something or how to go about engaging in a conversation on these kinds of things. And those are really important. The Bible says not to lean on your own understanding. Well, I'd say it's important to not lean on your own understanding with even how to talk about a subject, because there's tried and true, and it's not just from my experiences, there's experiences from the saints, the experiences from modern apologists who have had good success with this. So there's tried and true methods of doing all of this: yoga, talking to non-Christians who'd bang at your door, and going with those in an acceptable and preferred fashion. I'd say that those are the ones that people definitely need to read.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So this is all contained in the book, All Things Catholic, a guide from A to Z. It's available from Sophia Institute Press or wherever you buy your books, of course. Support your local Catholic bookstore in town. You're down in New Orleans, aren't you, Shaun?
I am. Yep, down in the
And
Diocese of New Orleans.
and what's your Catholic bookstore down there?
We have West Bank Religious here in Marrero, and then there's two on the East Bank in actually Metairie area. It's Mule's, and I think it's called the Religious Bookhouse.
Oh, yeah. And then do the Daughters of St. Paul, do they have a location in
Actually, yeah, thank you. Yep, we're good friends with the Daughters of St. Paul, so they're in Metairie up on Veterans. For any local listeners.
So, just as I gave him a quiz about local Catholic bookstores, where I live in the Diocese of Green Bay, Wisconsin, Cathedral Book and Gifts in Green Bay, St. Patrick's in Appleton, On This Rock in Oshkosh, even here in Shawano, there's a Christian bookstore run by a parishioner with other stuff as well. So probably has resources available too, maybe not as large as maybe a Catholic enterprise. But anyways, lots of reasons to support your Catholic bookstore. I know for me, like sometimes I'm like, I can get this on Amazon and it'll come in 2 days, or I'm like, I could get this today and I could support this Catholic bookstore and make sure they're here as a resource for another year, for another decade to come. And so, head on out, get All Things Catholic. Where can people find you online, Shaun?
You can find me usually on Instagram. I'm less on Twitter, Facebook, of course. But then I write for Epic Pew in the National Catholic Register most often.
Well, wonderful. Well, give him a follow, look for his content, and get your copy of All Things Catholic. Thanks so much, Shaun, for joining me today.
Thanks for the excellent questions.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.